Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. And we're going to take up item D5.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. D5. Term limits. Okay, the board asked me to provide term limit ordinance, and so I prepared a draft for your discussion. And if it's good to go, then we'll go ahead and put it on for a first reading. We have on my memo that we were going to do the first reading on May 20th, but I think we're going to actually put the first reading on for May 27th, so we'll need to change that date. And then we'll go forward with, if so choose, you'll go forward with adopting it on the June 10th would be the second reading and adoption, potential adoption.
Any comment from the board on the Greta's draft ordinance?
I don't know, I'm just gonna say it again. For one, I don't think this is necessarily a good idea for Lassen County, just because we're so small, we have such a narrow pool of people that even wanna run for this. We're all readily accessible, we're all easily visible, we're not anonymous by any means, etc. And the other thing, you know, is I get to reading over this and whatnot, there's one other thing I'd like to bring in there, is kind of picking in the scab again too, but saw it happen here, saw it happen in Warnock County, it's happened in a couple other counties too, and that's this whole recall thing. And if it's, I'd like to have something in there that if there is a recall with or without criminal prosecution. Well, so if it's a recall, if somebody is selected with a recall with no criminal prosecution, their term will start immediately. The 2 years is null and void. But if there is criminal prosecution activity involved, it doesn't matter if they're convicted or not, in the recall process, well then that would, if it's less than 2 years, you know, she got that 2 year minimum, you know, to kind of word it something like that. You follow me on that?
I don't think I understand.
We're just gonna use Tom for an example.
I'm a good example.
Because with Tom's situation with the recall with him, okay. If this was in effect today, if this was in effect 3 years ago, with Tom's.
When it started, when I was sworn in, is that what you're saying?
Right, if there was no criminal prosecution activity. Okay, but if there was criminal prosecution activity, that 6 months or whatever it was he had in there, that wouldn't start until in January. You follow me on that? Because you have in here 2 years.
I think the essence of the proposal is that if, in Tom's case, he's serving less than 2 years of the incumbent's term, so that doesn't count at all.
Right.
If it were more than 2 years, it would count for a full term.
Right. And what I'm saying is, if that less than 2 years takes place with no criminal activity, that would start immediately. If there is criminal activity and the prosecution takes place, well then, in Tom's case, that would.
So in Tom's case, his 8 months would count for a full term?
If there was no criminal activity. It would count as a full term.
On the incumbent's part, or
On Tom's part.
Why would you want to do that? I'm not sure.
Because it seems like there's going to be such a recall frenzy. Yes, thank you, whoever said that. A recall frenzy for just because you don't like a guy. I mean, we just saw it happen in Modoc. We saw it here in Lassen. You know, I've seen it in a couple of places with RCRC down in other counties too. And a recall is there for a reason, and it's just not just because the group of people don't like the people you got. I mean, that's why there's elections every year. That's why we have the elections, and they're just using that in my thought.
So if I understand what you're suggesting, is if somebody gets elected in a recall election where there are less than 2 years yet to serve,
Right.
if the recallee, for lack of a better word, had criminal charges alleged then that less than 2 years would then count as a full term?
By the DA, by
Okay.
the DA.
But you want to watch Perry Mason?
I think it's gonna be very difficult to tie into
Yeah.
your appointments, because the DA is independent, and that could take years. And you can't take somebody's charges, an innocent until proven guilty. So to take charges and then have that somehow tied to a person's term, I think you're.
That just clouds the issue so much that,
Even for
even for me, I can't even follow that, Aaron.
I know, it's hard to follow, it wouldn't apply to you.
Could also be by the AG or by the feds too.
I think
But
we
it's
should,
independent of,
we'll obviously get some public comment and bring it back to the
Yeah.
board. But before we go to the public, is there,
Well, I
fine.
read this document and I like the way it was written, and I fully support it.
I think we need to keep it fairly simple,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think what Aaron's talking about as an issue is gonna be coming up common.
hope not.
I mean,
I really do. I mean, there's-
I don't know if it's ever been a recall because of criminal, putting a supervisor prosecutes for criminal activity. I mean, if it does happen, you're gonna have to resign anyhow.
You go to jail.
Yeah.
Just go to jail.
Not only.
Can't attend the board meetings from jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, great technology.
I would-
I was being accused of being let out of jail on Tuesdays at 10.
No, I think we're clouding the issue that we don't need to cloud.
Yeah,
Does the,
exactly. Let's leave it out.
before we go to public, is there, Jim, do you have anything to say, or should we go to public?
To go to public, and I have some comments at the end.
Okay, so we'll open it up for public comment. Anything? No?
Not controversial.
Okay,
Okay, Jim.
bring it right back. Start off with you, Tom.
Well, I accept the document as written, I'm for the term limits. I know some aren't, this isn't, means nothing for the present board, Jim and Bob, you guys have done a wonderful job here, and this has nothing to do with you guys at all. But I do like the idea of seeing fresh faces and new ideas coming through. Richard probably doesn't like it quite as much as me. But, yeah, I
It's
support this document.
12 years, though, isn't it? I mean, we say fresh faces, it's 12 years.
That's
Yeah, I'd say 12 years is plenty.
I wholeheartedly okay, just that's how it is.
Jim, do you have any comments?
What did Bob say? You said you like it as it is?
As it is written, it's fine.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I appreciate you initiating the discussion. You indicated that when you first joined the board, it was part of your campaign when you ran. And I know you've indicated that it's not meant to be disrespectful for those of us who have long terms, and I totally appreciate and accept that, and don't take it as being disrespectful. And, at first, I gave it thought, having been elected 9 times to this board, I'm thinking to myself, what was I thinking? Because 1 term can be challenging, 2 terms, it takes you about a term to kind of figure out what's going on, and maybe your 2nd term you're able to engage in. Most people, when you look at the roster, and I have a roster of people who've served on the board as part of the history research that we've done. We've roughly had 105 people who've been elected to serve over 150 years. And there's only 13 people out of that group that have served 4 terms or more. So had a term limit been put in place, it would have only accounted for about 10% of the people who have served. So this notion that we've stifled new ideas and so forth as being a basis of, public debate and public policy and public decisions, I think is a bogus argument personally. I've run 10 times. There's only 4 people in the state history that's ever run 10 times for a board of supervisors. One guy actually got elected 10 times and served 10 times, and that's Kenny Hahn down in LA County. Served from 1952 to 1992. And, he was a revered figure down there, and the people, loved him, and he made sure all the potholes were filled, and he was at every ribbon cutting. He was known to have in the trunk of his car, the ribbon and the scissors and the golden shovels, and took advantage of all the opportunities. In terms of the 10, I've won 9 of the 10 races I've had, except for twice in my second race and my 7th race when I ran unopposed. I've always had a scrap to get elected. It was not a cakewalk by any means. The debate of the ideas took place, and so you constantly are having to reinvent yourself and move yourself forward. I would say that my thinking today is totally different from what my thinking was when I ran the first time in 1976. You talk about new ideas, and that's great, but I think it's more important that from the voter's perspective, it's the right ideas. And just because it's a new idea doesn't necessarily make it the right idea. And I think what term limits does, and it's not going to affect me because it can be retroactively applied, which means I could serve 3 more terms, which means I could maybe run 13 times and serve 12 times. And I got to tell you right now, that's not going to happen. It's all you can do sometimes to force yourself to deal with it. It's a tough job, and every day getting up and doing that is not always that easy, especially as you get older. But at the same time, it's the voters in terms of who they want to represent. Now, the concept of term limits go back to the Founding Fathers, and it's interesting, despite the embrace of the Tea Party and some of the others, that we have to return to our constitutional principles. The Founding Fathers rejected the concept of term limits. It wasn't until 1951 with the 22nd Amendment that we saw term limits imposed at the federal level, and it was to deal with executive authority, and it was basically the reaction to Franklin Roosevelt having been elected 4 times as president. Now, he wasn't the only person to run for president more than 2 times. There were several had been in office, left, and came back. Teddy Roosevelt, revered within the Republican circle, ran for and was elected twice. And he ran a 3rd time. He came back after he turned over the office to his successor, decided he didn't think he was doing a good enough job, and we're reading an excellent biography now with Doris Kearns Goodwin's on basically Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, and what that whole series of what brought about their friendship and brought about the fracturing of their friendship. So historically, term limits have only been something that has been pursued I would say in recent years, and it was basically, it's partisan driven, and those who run and aren't successful with their new ideas to, maybe not the right ideas when it comes to the voters, and not happy with the voters' choice of the opposition that they were unsuccessful at defeating, oftentimes are the forces that push hard for that kind of reform. We saw that at the state level back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and the state effort was driven because of one person by the name of Willie Brown, and there was a certain contempt for him, and they turned him into this kind of demonic figure, and they succeeded in getting the voters to impose term limits at the state level. And those limits were in place for 15 plus years when I think the voters realized the short-sightedness of that policy, and they've now kind of modified and liberalized the terms in that respect. And I think Brian Dolly now, as part of that new freshman class in Sacramento, has found himself beneficial because he can maybe stay in one house and serve for 12 years and maybe develop some some ability to maybe affect state policy on the large measure. So, but bringing it back to the local level, of the 13 people who served, 6 of those only served for 4 terms or were elected to 4 terms. I would say a third of the people who were elected did not even finish out whatever their final term was. So historically, I think it's very clear, the 27 people that have been elected in the last 40 years since I've been involved in county politics, we've elected 27 people. There's only 3 people that would be affected by term limits under the current arrangement. The bulk of the ones who served those long terms was between 1914 and 1974, and that was after the nonpartisan nature got away from partisan politics for electing our local officials. But in that 40 years, the 27 people, there's only 3 of us who would be affected by these proposed term limits had they been in effect for a longer period. Mr. Pyle is one. He's elected to his fourth term. He's finishing up. He served a couple years under appointment by the governor before him, so he would have 18 years on the board. Myself, with my nine terms that I've been elected to, I've served 34 of the 36 years to date. And the other one is Brian Dolly. And this is what's kind of, interesting to me, and I think this is what the voters, and I've had a fair amount of feedback from folks. I have a lot of good friends who said, yeah, maybe term limits would be a good idea, so that we can, get other people involved. But I've had a fair amount of people also come back and say, why are you wanting to limit our choice? If we want to elect you for another 3 terms or 5 terms, if that's what we want, and it's your ideas that we back and support, why are we denying ourselves of that? And that's the debate that I think the public's going to have to ultimately have. And they will. But I would say that Brian Dolly, entered the race. He was young, he was fresh, he was 30 years old. And in the June primary, he smashed 2 opponents very handily, much like Mr. Albaugh defeated his opponents in this last election very handily. And his district actually is known, if you look at the longevity, most of the tenure of the supervisors in the 4th district are fairly long. Gary Lemke served 3 terms. There was one fellow back in from the 1920s to the 1940s. He served actually 28 years. Gerald Packwood served 24 years. So there's some longevity in that respect. But Brian wound up not drawing an opponent in his 2nd race, his 3rd race, and his 4th race. He literally ran unopposed for a 4th term. And the people in his district truly appreciated what he was doing and what he was trying to do, and they supported him. And had he not had that unanimous kind of support in his 4th race, he would not have been in a position to maybe run for the state assembly. And I think we're all very appreciative of the fact he's down there. But had term limits been in effect, his ability to, on a political basis, serve in that capacity would have probably been not a reality. And the other thing goes with term limits, and I just love the catcalls and the rhetoric from those that find contempt of mine even sitting here in the room today and going on about the career politicians. And this is particularly true with my Republican friends, and they talk about how we need to end the career politicians. But they're good at singling people like myself out because I'm of a different political persuasion than they are. I'm not going to be a Tea Party member. I'll be very blunt about that. And because of that, I'm no good, so therefore I'm a career politician. But then you have career politicians who are Tea Party members, who, in the case of Congressman McClintock, who represented this district, who I have developed a great appreciation for, was not a supporter of his in the early years, but in his time when he served as our congressman, totally appreciate it. Put 28 years in the state legislature and is now running for his 4th term for the House of Representatives. Got a battle on his hands. He's going to put his ideas up against the guy that wants to put in the new ideas, and we're going to see what the voters in that district have to say. Are they going to go with the new ideas, or are they going to go with the ideas of the man there? But they're going to choose the right ideas. And you don't see that same, opposition coming out about that individual as a career politician. And I would say that McClintock and myself have similar time frames in terms of serving in office. So I think the hypocrisy of those who want to support term limits on that basis is something that I don't have a lot of appreciation for and hold in a certain amount of contempt. So being consistent, I'm going to say is I think the people need to decide. 5% of the supervisors elected in the last 40 years would have been term limited out. Voter imposed term limits, to me, is far more effective. We've seen 12 instances of the 52 regular elections in which the voters chose to end somebody's term prior to reaching, either at the end of their 3rd term or before, not allowing them to go into a 4th term or above. We've had 4 recall elections, all of them successful, that ended a term before the term was even over with, in terms of affecting that. So 31% of the time, the voters have been very good at sorting out which ideas they want to back and which ideas they don't, whose record they support, who they don't. If it was a situation where we had 5 Jim Chapmans for 40 years and it was kind of a lock game like you saw in some of the big urban counties like San Diego and others that have adopted term limits, where you have the same board that sits basically together for 20 years or beyond, then maybe term limits have some merits to be considered. But that hasn't been the case in Lassen County. And so I think if we're going to have this debate, we need to look at fact and look at fiction. And I've commented about that in my board article, and I'll be commenting that out on the street as I talk to my constituents and those, and as the debate takes place. But I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake for the board to embrace this. I think it's something that the voters are hopefully going to ultimately reject.
Thanks.
Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alrighty. I appreciate all that. I feel a bit silly if I don't say something after.
Oh, yeah?
I'll keep it brief, okay? But I guess I mainly just want to address it because, you know, unfortunately, I've been beat up a little bit in the paper after just suggesting, you know, that we have the discussion. So I just want to set the record straight and read it, so this is part of the issue. When I suggested the discussion on term limits, I made it clear that the discussion was in no way to take away from the tremendous service to this community of previous, but more importantly, current multi-term supervisors. The discussion was meant to be about the future and not the past. The suggestion to open a dialogue regarding term limits proved to be sensitive to some. The mere suggestion of a discussion on the matter resulted in the Lassen Times editorial column where they, to shoot down the idea, beginning with the headline, "We don't need term limits in Lassen County." Throughout the editorial, the writer took shots at me for suggesting the idea, then ironically closed by saying, "Let me thank Mr. Wasik for bringing this issue up for public discussion. It's a worthy conversation to be had by all." The same day the editorial circulated, the board voted unanimously to move forward with the draft ordinance to limit the future board members to 3 terms. Supervisor Chapman shared some of his opinions via his supervisor column in today's paper. I respect his opinions, and I respect his service on this board. The fact is that numerous counties in California have already given their voters the ability to decide on the question of term limits for the Board of Supervisors, with the question being, does the voting population of a specific county wish to eliminate the possibility of a politician serving more than a specified number of terms? The discussion is not partisan, nor is it directed at any individual. In fact, term limits for the Board of Supervisors has been overwhelmingly supported by California voters who have been given the opportunity to vote on the issue. It has also been suggested that term limits is a Tea Party or Republican motive. The recent results in San Diego County, where nearly 70% of the voters embraced limiting terms for Board of Supervisors, certainly proves that this issue is embraced across all party lines. In fact, voters in San Diego, San Francisco, San Joaquin, Los Angeles, Santa Clara, Ventura, and San Mateo have all been given the opportunity to vote on this matter. Marin County is preparing to include it on their 2014 ballot, and Lassen County voters should not be denied the same opportunity. The debate should be with the voter as to what box to check on his or her ballot. And that's all I have to say. So, anyhow, what's the pleasure of the board?
Well, I move to accept, read this document, D5. Term limits.
Okay. Is there any more discussion?
Well, just under discussion, I mean, I have no problem with putting this forward to the voters, but I think we're almost,
That's all it is.
I mean, it's just scary that, in a way, because it's almost uneducated in a way, because if you talk to the people, who wants to run for supervisor? I mean, there's not very many people that want to run. You know, I mean, anyway, it's just need to be education, like Jim was talking about. It needs to be educated, and we hope that the people can make, I mean, they're gonna make their own educated decision, but also to educate it so we're not cutting ourselves in the foot. And I think that the voters can vote on a regular basis anyway, and they make their decisions that way. But anyway, so, and I got no problem with putting this forward to the voters by any means, but it just needs to be an educated deal as much as we can.
Well, I can guarantee you, put it to the voters can approve it, but very few people are going to be lucky to serve 3 terms. And that's the reality. And so, you know, in some respects, it's a moot question.
I think we're done with the public comment, we're gonna take action now, so.
You let
Okay,
him
if there-
talk for 30 minutes and you won't.
We did take public comment and we closed it, so, okay, so, we have a motion, and do we have a second? All right, so, all those in favor, can you pull the vote? Sure. Madam Clerk, can you pull the vote?
Supervisor Chapman?
No.
Supervisor Alba?
Yes.
Supervisor Kyle?
Right.
Supervisor Hammond?
All right,
Supervisor Wilson?
Aye. All right, well, thank you for the discussion, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, everybody, for,
So we'll be putting this on the May 27th as a first reading,
okay.
as written. Okay.
All right, let's quickly take up H1.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, the auditor is researching funding issues, so I will endeavor to represent this item. Last year's budget included funds to upgrade the county financial system, which our IT staff has identified it as the current system being, the platform being at its life expectancy or past it. The agenda item letter from the county auditor pretty well spells out the request, totals $35,000. Funds are budgeted from the ACO fund. I'm pretty sure that's an appropriate expenditure of that fund. And would recommend that it be approved.
All righty, I do have a speaker card on this, but before we go to the public, we're gonna, do any board members have questions? Okay, so, we'll go to public, Irene Spencer, do you have a, fill that card?
Well, first, I don't have any problem at all updating software or even updating our hardware, but Lassen County for some time, and I don't know, maybe since Richard died, I don't know how long you've not had an IT person, but you keep buying and approving this software, and you don't have anybody to install it. This contract, on the first page, it says on-site installation declined. Now, I'm just wondering why we don't have anybody to install this. We have computers sitting in storage that are a year old and probably, who knows, longer. Is Julie here? Julie can tell you where all the computers are sitting. You keep ordering this stuff, you keep ordering software. The software, the $27,000 software that the county clerk purchased isn't installed yet. You keep buying this software, and I have no problem with that. I think we should be up to date. IT department, we should have 2 or 3 people in our IT department. I'd like the board to, in their budget hearings, consider creating or rehiring, maybe it's already there, rehiring at least 2 to 3 IT people. It doesn't make any sense for you to buy things like this and have it sit. And then you decline installation. So this means this is going to sit. This is critical equipment and software. This is critical for the functioning of this county. So I just think that if you approve it, you better get really serious about getting in-house IT people instead of borrowing somebody from the college or whatever. I don't know how often, I know I've gone into county offices and your computers have been down. My computer at home goes down. I know this happens, but not as regularly as it happens in Lassen County, and it may simply because you've got all this software and equipment sitting in storage who knows when this is gonna be, this is critical. And who knows when you're gonna get around to finding somebody to install it. So I'd ask you, if you're gonna approve it, which I recommend that you do, get serious about very soon interviewing somebody to be permanent on county staff. So Richard can call up and say, the assessor's office is down, you get over here, or the assessor's office can call and say,